Thank you, and thank you for having me, to everyone here and everyone who's watching virtually. And I know you've had a morning. I looked at the schedule, and it was a really great group of people, and getting a lot of different perspectives, which is great. It's been a very slow and boring beginning of the year on housing. Not much has happened in the legislature. But seriously, it's I'm actually optimistic about 2020. We've been working on SB 50 and its predecessor, SB 827, for over 2 years now. And even though anytime you have a bill voted down, which everyone has had at some point or another, it's always disappointing. But I think it's really important to back up and look at the big picture. California, for a very long time, until very recently, has been stuck. We got into a really dysfunctional place, which happens in communities and happens to people, where we set up a really bad system on housing. We set up a system that was designed to fail, that was designed to build very little housing, and the proof is in the pudding. We rank 49 out of 50 states in homes per capita, and since the early 60s, our population has almost tripled at the same time that our housing production has gone down by about 2/3 to 75%. And we've done it not by accident. We did it through intentional policies to deprioritize housing by downzoning and banning any kind of multi-unit construction in the vast majority of California, by setting up unending processes and appeals and lawsuits so that it can take years and years and years to approve even a modest project that's within zoning. And we defunded affordable housing, and we just did all sorts of things to make it clear that housing wasn't a priority. And for a long time, it's not like this is a new problem. The housing crisis is much worse now than it's ever been, and it's broader in California. It's no longer certain parts of the Bay Area and LA. But we've had housing problems for a long time in many parts of California. But we were stuck, and we were not able to take the steps necessary to pivot to a pro-housing policy, a policy where we acknowledge that it needs to be a priority for everyone who needs housing to have housing, that we need to have enough housing for everyone who needs it. It seems like such a basic concept, but we got away with that in California, and for decades, we were just stuck in this dysfunctional holding pattern. And while we were stuck, over those decades that we were stuck, real damage was very gradually being done to our community, and that has really burst out into the open in the last 10 years or so, where we've seen the human toll that it's taken. And the most visible and obvious is what's happening on our streets, with people sleeping in their cars, people sleeping in tents, people having nowhere to go. But it's also in a less visible place, in terms of kids who can't come back to the community where they grew up, and young families that are leaving the state entirely because they can't envision a housing future for themselves. Small businesses that are shutting down because they can't maintain a stable workforce. We're seeing that in San Francisco now. That's new. Large employers who are saying, we're not going to expand here. We'd like to, but we're not going to, because we have no confidence that our workers will ever be able to find housing. So it's tearing at the fabric of our economy. It is tearing at our cultural fabric, as it makes communities less diverse. When you say only people who can afford, super expensive housing or a big single-family home are allowed to live in this community. And of course, it's undermining our climate goals as we push people into longer and longer and longer commutes, and cover up farmland and clog the freeways, and put lots more carbon into the atmosphere, because we're forcing people into long commutes. And so when things get bad enough, people's minds have a way of opening up, and that is happening around housing, and that's why I'm optimistic. And it started long before SB 50 existed, and a lot of times when I first introduced the original version of SB 50, SB 827, I remember thinking this is going to be a hard, controversial bill, but there are plenty of hard, controversial bills in the legislature. I had absolutely no idea that it was going to take on this larger-than-life presence, which SB 50 continued. And of course, it's not about one bill, but I think what this legislation did over a 2-year period, I think it helped to elevate the conversation around housing. It helped to call the question, regardless of the content of the bill, that when we say we want housing to be more affordable and available and plentiful, what do we mean by that? Does it mean that we just get mad and jump up and down and stomp our feet and wring our hands and go out and protest? Protesting is great, it's really important. But does it mean that that's what we're going to do, or does it mean we're going to actually take the tangible policy steps to fix the problem? And of course, SB 50 was not a panacea, wasn't a silver bullet. There's no such thing in housing. It's an all-of-the-above approach. But SB 50 did help flag one particularly important issue, low-density, unsustainable zoning that dominates California. But it also flagged this broader issue of, are we going to continue to set essentially no standards for cities and let cities do whatever they want and have a continued race to the bottom where cities have no incentive to really build enough housing? And that while some cities will do the right thing, many will not. And so I think it helped to, move the conversation forward in a very significant way. And for that, I'm very grateful to our entire coalition. It was an amazing coalition, both the nearly 20 co-authors of the bill that we had in the Senate and the Assembly, and a supporter list that went on for pages and pages and pages. It was very inspiring, and I also want to thank the 18 senators who were willing to vote for a controversial bill that was politically impossible 5 or 10 years ago, and they were willing to go out on a limb and support it, plus the 2 additional senators who were prepared to support it had there been a 21st vote. We were really 1 vote short. And although it's always disappointing to lose, to have a bill that, again, just a few years ago would not have made it out of a single committee. In fact, in 2018, it did not make it out of a single committee, make it out of 2 committees with bipartisan support, and be on the verge, so close to passing on the Senate floor. That is a huge step forward, and I think our whole coalition should be very proud of that. But of course, it's not about one bill, and it's not about one author. I was, happy to travel around the state for 2 years, as I did on this bill, talking to anyone who would talk to me in the Central Valley, in Southern California, the Bay Area, wherever else. I was the Central Coast. I was happy to do that. I was happy to take the slings and the arrows, and there were plenty of those as well as the love. But it's not just about me. It's about the issue. And so the question is, what are the next steps? And this work, and I think the positive steps in the legislature started about 3 years ago with some of the good ADU work that was happening. Then in 2017, we accelerated it with several big funding bills for affordable housing, improvements to the Housing Accountability Act, SB 35, our streamlining bill, as well as some tightening up of the housing element and so forth. And now I think we really have, and then last year, some wonderful work on ADUs to make crystal clear, once again, that when we say that cities have to allow ADUs, we really actually mean it, and we're going to basically eliminate your power to stop them, which we, I think, have now effectively done. But now the question is, what's next? And even though the last 3-4 years, what we've been really doing, a lot of what we've been doing is putting teeth into existing law, into the Housing Accountability Act, into the ADU laws, into the housing element laws, and then adding some more funding, we have to start taking transformational steps. I'm not saying you solve the problem in one legislative session. It's always going to take time, but we have to stop, continue to do the small things. Small things matter, incremental steps matter, but we need to also do the big moving of the dial, because we are we're running out of time. When you look at how dire things are in so many parts of the state, we have to have a greater sense of urgency, which I think is starting to happen. And we need to be taking big steps now. And so I see this year those steps having the potential for them to happen. One is our great and fearless leader of the Senate, Senator Atkins, who I want to just thank her from the bottom of my heart for understanding the importance, not just of SB 50 itself, but of the whole conversation, and making sure that, when you are the leader of either the Senate or the Assembly of a caucus, you don't have unlimited political capital. You have to choose your battles. You can't fight every battle. And she chose to spend political capital to make sure that this bill got to the floor. And then she chose to, for anyone who saw the debate, she doesn't speak on very many bills. Speakers and pro tems typically don't speak on very many bills. When they do, it's usually at the end. She got up right after I presented the bill, and she was the second speaker. That doesn't happen. And since I've been here, I've never seen that. And she did that to send the message. And so I want to thank her, not just as her, as an author, and because I'm grateful that she did that for a bill I was authoring, but thank her for really standing up and saying we have to do things differently and we need a big step. And she has now made clear that she is committed to moving a significant production bill this year. She said it on the floor of the Senate. She said it in other contexts, and she will have my full support. And we've now developed a lot of expertise over the last 2 years, both technical expertise, but also understanding where all the pitfalls are, where the opportunities are on this kind of big bill, and we'll be providing Senator Atkins with full support, and she has my 1,000% support. And I look forward to working with her and with other colleagues, because a number of the members who did not vote for SB 50, they were not philosophically opposed. They were people who, frankly, until the end, were struggling with the issue. There were not that many senators who were just categorically philosophically opposed. So I think we can get there and have a strong bill under Senator Atkins' leadership. But that won't be the only bill. There will be a package from both houses this year. I'm working on several bills that will, I think, complement the other work that is happening. I know I have colleagues who are working on other bills. The Assembly is working on bills. Assemblyman Bloom, Assemblyman Chu, hopefully Assemblymember Gabriel, who you just saw, who I know is someone who cares a lot about housing, despite having a challenging district on the issue. And the good thing is we have more and more members who are authoring bills in all parts of the state. I was thrilled when Lorena Gonzalez, when I saw that she introduced a density bonus enhancement bill. Before I even read what it was about, I was so happy that a member, Lorena Gonzalez does amazing work in a lot of different areas. She's a real progressive champion, but she hasn't done as much in housing. It's not a criticism, it's just we can't work in every area. But I'm thrilled that she's now taking on a significant housing bill. And there are more members who are, coming to us asking for bills. People want to do housing bills. And that is terrific, because we need to broaden this out. It can't just be about one member or just a few members from the Bay Area. We need members from all over the state who are doing this work. And that creates the foundation for a very strong package. In addition to having a strong production bill, zoning reform, hopefully streamlining, we have to do more and we have an opportunity to do more on funding for below market rate housing this year. In the last few years, after decades of being derelict and providing funding for housing at the state level, and in fact, the most significant thing we did in the last few decades around state funding for housing was take it away when the state ended redevelopment without replacing it with anything. And that was such a powerful tool for so many cities to fund housing. When you're San Francisco, we can do a lot of it from our general fund. Most cities don't have that luxury. They need tools, and the state took those tools away. And in the last few years, we have been starting to get back into the business of really funding affordable housing. We passed now 2 bonds in the last few years, which is great. We passed SB 2, Senator Atkins' bill to create a permanent source of housing, and now in the budget last year, we increased the low-income tax credit program. But the challenge is that, with the exception of SB 2, which is a permanent source, everything else is one time. It's bonds, and bonds, of course, are great, but once you spend them, they're not replenished. Even the low-income tax credit, David Chu has proposed that bill like 6 times. It's like an annual ritual. He introduces the bill, and Governor Brown was always against it. He would veto it, but Governor Newsom supported it, but he put it in the budget instead. So it's like every year you have to like fight for it again. And I get it. If you're especially the governors do this, right? You want one-time spending. You don't want to make long-term commitments, because when the recession comes around, then it becomes more painful. But we need to stop. And SB 2, which is important, it's $250 million a year, which is great, but we need that times whatever. It needs to be even bigger, as I know Senator Atkins would absolutely agree with me if she were sitting here. It was a wonderful platform, but we need to build on that. And so we need to start establishing sustainable, long-term, predictable, not subject to the annual budget wins, funding for affordable housing in a significant way, so that cities know that they can rely on it and they can make decisions and know that money's going to be there. I think a lot of us were disappointed when the governor vetoed SB 5 last year. That would have established a pretty significant long-term funding stream. And the governor's veto message left the door open, and I know Senator Bell has reintroduced the bill as SB 795, and I'm proud to co-author that bill, and we need to work with the governor to try to get this done. So like I said, I'm an optimist, and we have to meaningfully address this problem because we have no choice. This is about the future of the state. And even though housing in California is not on exactly the same level as climate change in terms of like the immolation of the planet, that existential threat, it is the next rung down in terms of a severe threat to California's future. And it's not just California, we're seeing other states struggling as well. And we need to, I think California sometimes leads the way in good ways and bad ways. We led it in a good way in civil rights. We led it in a bad way on our criminal justice system, where we pioneered mass incarceration in California. We've led it in a bad way in housing too. And we need to now start setting we need to model good examples for the rest of the country. So I think we'll get there. And again, thank you for having me today.
I'm Sigrid Both, and I have written about mental health and homelessness issues for decades, starting at Sacramento Bee in the 70s with the emptying of the state hospitals, which is a long but jagged line to where we are now. I've heard a lot of discussion here today, and it's all important discussion about market rate housing. We're mostly talking about market rate housing. I don't know what exactly is being proposed for. There is a lot in the governor's budget, which will be wending its way through the legislature, but to deal with the supportive housing need of many of the homeless, mentally ill people who we see on the streets. And that was addressed in some of the discussion over your bill.
Yeah, absolutely. We need a lot more supportive housing, and right now, frankly, SB 35 is helping with that, because low-income housing, including supportive housing, is now streamlined in essentially all of California because of SB 35. And so we've now accelerated that, and there are supportive housing projects in San Francisco, I know, that are using SB 35, so they're getting approved in 3 to 6 months. Whereas it would, and there's no opportunity to appeal, sue, et cetera. So we are accelerating that. SB 50 would have opened up an enormous amount of land for supportive housing where it's illegal now. Single-family zoning is a ban on supportive housing because no one's building single-family homes to house the formerly homeless. You have to have multi-unit, and this is something that gets sometimes lost in the debate around zoning reform and SB 50. There was a reason why one of our sponsors was the Nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California, NPH, and other affordable housing developers, including supportive housing developers, because when you ban apartment buildings, when you ban multi-unit by zoning low density, you are banning affordable housing, including supportive housing, because you have to have multi-unit to build that. So it is important. We put the governor's, there's been more money in the budget for it. We passed a bond for it that Senator De Leon authored, and we have a lot more work to do there. And we have to make sure that we rebuild our mental health and addiction safety net. I have a few bills on that this year. Those are two other issues I work on a lot because it all goes together.
Fast question, Senator. We have a lot of challenges in California, the climate change, 30 billion fighting wildfires, the ocean acidity. And as we look at the homeless, what would be the potential coordinating employment training where we can train maybe in a very short period of time some of the homeless to do some of the work that needs to be done, which is renewable energy, dealing with reforestation, dealing with the water deterioration. How do we coordinate all these resources? Because the expenses are just amazing. $30 billion to fight wildfires.
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes to job training, that's sort of a transcendent issue about making sure we have job opportunities for everyone, because there are people housed and unhoused who struggle with employment and need to have their skills updated for the new economy, and that's really important. To be clear, among the homeless population, a lot of them are working. I think sometimes because homeless people we tend to see on the streets are probably sometimes the most challenged, but we know that most homeless people, aren't, and I know you know this, are not mentally ill or not addicted, and many of them are working. They might be sleeping in a car or a shelter or couch surfing or whatever, but they are working, sometimes more than one job. So for people who need the job training, whether they're homeless or not homeless, we just need to do more. And there has been an increase in resources for those kind of training and programs. We also need, back to what I was talking about with the building trades and the building industry, we have a severe construction worker shortage. It's really bad, and it was, it's a very unstable industry in terms of, economic cycles. And during the Great Recession, 12, 13 years ago, the construction workforce just collapsed because there was no work, so they got scattered. We should be actually doing a counter-cyclical thing where we should ramp up affordable housing investment during downturns so we can keep the construction workers employed. Then if I can become political, we need a new administration that actually embraces immigrants, because the immigration policies of this administration have harmed the construction industry because construction is an immigrant-driven workforce. And if we're able to achieve peace between labor and the building industry, that'll open up doors to dramatically expand apprenticeship programs to help rebuild and stabilize the construction workforce and create that kind of pathway to the middle class for a lot more people.
Any other questions? Oh, right here.
Hi, I'm a first-year grad student at Sac State getting my master's in public policy and administration.
I'm sorry, where?
Sac State, our campus is just down the street. And in my applied economics class, we're tasked with addressing a problem statement, and ours is dealing with the issue of 2 full-time workers not being able to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. And so one of our solutions among this issue is to address inclusive development and mixed income housing. Do you have any plans for that, or what's your general opinion on that? And also, how would you incentivize high wage earners in investing in living in mixed income housing?
Well, when we say mixed income, that's really about inclusionary housing programs where developers of market rate housing have to set aside a certain percentage for people earning X amount. It could be, and of course there's low income, very low income, extremely low income, moderate income. It's a whole range. And I'm a supporter of inclusionary housing. We have it in San Francisco. I supported it in San Francisco. SB 50 had robust inclusionary in it, up to 25%, unless the local percentage was higher, in which case the higher one would govern. And so I'm a supporter of it, and I think it's very important. The rub is that we sometimes in the debates about inclusionary, people become very fixated on what the percentage is. And of course, people don't live in percentages, people live in units. And so if you make the percentage too high, you make projects infeasible, or they become smaller, and then you end up with fewer units. And so the goal is to figure out, and it's different in different communities, what pencils out, what's the optimal sweet spot. So for example, in San Francisco, a feasibility analysis was done a few years ago showing that the sweet spot is 17%. That maximizes the number of units because it keeps projects feasible. It's the highest percentage you can do without impacting the feasibility of projects. Of course, my former colleagues on the Board of Supervisors have promptly set it at 20%, trending up to 25%. So they weren't really listening to the feasibility analysis. But some cities, it'll be lower. For example, in the Central Valley, it was probably lower than that. There might be some communities where it's higher because the value is so high. So the goal is to have those mixed income developments and to make sure we are maximizing the number of units that get built.
I think we got time for one more question.
Sure.
Hey, Senator. Louis Barante with California EMB. I am wondering what your perception is of your colleagues' sense of urgency about the housing crisis. Are they understanding the urgency more? You know, where in your sort of assessment do you feel like senators are in terms of their perceived need to address production and address the housing crisis generally?
And assembly members, I think there is a growing sense of urgency. I still don't think it's where it needs to be, but it has shifted dramatically. I remember, so I was elected in 2016. My assembly member, David Chu, was elected in 2014. We've known each other for a million years. We were on the Board of Supervisors together. So he came up here 2 years before I did. And I remember right after he came up, he said, I'm going to do all this housing stuff. Housing, because in San Francisco, it's been horrible for so long. And I remember him coming back and saying, Scott, it's hard for me to get people enthusiastic about this, and people are like, well, I don't want to deal with that, or not an issue in my community. And this was around renter protections, around funding, around other issues. He just was having trouble getting a critical mass. Fast forward, was 5 years until today, it's a totally different ballgame. So many members their communities are impacted. The fact that we have members from, parts of this, from I just read today that Assemblymember Ramos in San Bernardino County is now forming a select committee on homelessness in San Bernardino County. And not that there wasn't homelessness before, but it's gotten worse, even in areas that have always been considered low cost. And I'm starting to hear from colleagues in parts of the state that you would never have heard this 5 or 10 years ago, that the cost of housing is a growing and big problem. So I think there is a greater sense of urgency. They're also in the SB 50, and the fact that SB 50 got as many votes as it did, I think shows that, because that was a hard vote for almost everyone. And there were members who, stood up, who, someone like Connie Leyva, right? People who, if you had given me a list 2 years ago, who's going to stand up and speak? Senator Leyva is amazing. But again, representing San Bernardino County, you wouldn't have necessarily expected it, but she was enthusiastic about it. So I think there is growing urgency in both houses, but we just have to keep the pressure on to get that urgency even higher, because these are still really, really hard votes for a lot of members. And when you have all of your city council members, and not all, but a number of them, and mayors, and county boards of supervisors and neighborhood groups, yelling at you and blowing up your cell phone, it's hard. And so we need to just keep cultivating what has the benefit of being true, that we're in an emergency.
Great. Senator, thank you very much. Thanks for your time and for taking our question.
Thank you.